Hey everybody, it's Richard and Tom with Millennial X Coffee Talk on a sober Thursday morning, I think. Waiting on a couple more people to join us, in particular Morgan and Henry will be here.
Yeah.
So everybody can just go on mute for a minute while we get everything set up.
It
So
Okay, I just want to make sure.
is my name. That's
thanks everybody. We are still waiting on a couple people to join. They're still coming in the lobby, so hang tight. We appreciate everyone's patience. Morgan's in back-to-back. Henry's logging in. We've got a couple of friends that I want to make sure are here before we get started. So give me a second. Just checking the.
Is this a podcast? Podcast?
It will be, yeah. So, let's see. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'll keep an eye on the waiting room. And the goal of this conversation today is to have one that's pretty sobering and thoughtful. And the first thing I want to make sure is that it's great that there's a lot of conversation happening this week, but one of the most important things that needs to occur is that these conversations have to keep going, right? We can't just sort of talk about it this week or next week. We've really got to make sure that this is a ongoing dialogue for everybody. And it's an emotionally charged event for a lot of people. I know it should be an emotionally charged event. I want to work with folks to recognize and empathize with those stories. But I also want to make sure that we also go through a little bit of an education piece. So if at some point I'm sort of trying to push us past the emotional side, I hope everybody understands. It's not that I don't want to have those conversations. I think we need to have them. I think that passion is important. It's a really important piece of this. But I do want to make sure that we also say, well, what are the solutions? What are the things we can be doing? So, and it's awkward and it's uncomfortable. And, I'll be the first to say that, as we talked about this and thought about it with Tom, and, the first thing we did is we just posted it because we just wanted to get it out there. And then a couple of people, I know Galem's on here who's becoming a good friend. And it was like, oh, well, we need to make sure we have African Americans or people of other colors on here as part of this panel or discussion. And I will say, from my perspective, it was a little awkward because I was like, okay, now am I trying to just sort of find this token person? And so I'd love to understand, Morgan, if I can start with you.
Yeah.
Did it come across that way? Like, this is that awkward stuff, right? Like, and I think for people, and I'm asking it awkwardly, and if it sounds terrible, call me out on it. Like, that's really important because I think so many times for me, I don't know how to address it that doesn't make it sound like I'm patronizing, or am I, just trying to find the token person to come on. I'm Jewish and I've sort of felt that way a little bit in certain situations, but nobody really knows that. Like, they sort of know just by looking at you that obviously you're African American. So I'd love, how do we even approach wanting to have this conversation with people of color? Because even that can feel awkward from my perspective. And I don't know if others feel that way. Please, everybody, go in the chat, disagree, agree, all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, Richard and Tom, thanks for having me here and allowing me to share. Tom, I hope that your injury is getting better. My Achilles is better now. I can start to walk, so that's good. So we have the injury fam over here. So one thing I will share, Richard, is that it's tough because you don't want to offend anybody, right? And also, if you do say the wrong thing, I ultimately will feel some type of way. And then it's like, no, now we got beef. And it's like, whoa, why do we have beef right now? Over one thing. What I will say, and this is for everyone, and I made a video on Instagram about it, is that in reaching out to somebody, and again, this is all out of good intentions when people have reached out to me this, and I I'm not really upset about it. I'm just saying just to think about this. When you ask someone like me, how are you doing? There's a default answer, which is terrible. Like, how else would I be feeling? I'm definitely, if I say great, that's a lie, because I'm not going to have the conversation. And if I say terrible, then you feel terrible too. And so I encourage all of you that have African American friends to not reach out and just say how you're doing, because that obviously I'm feeling terrible. Like, I'm sad, I'm emotional, like I cried all weekend. I live like 10 minutes away from like downtown Atlanta, so like I saw everything that was happening and I was just torn apart. And I didn't have any way to really explain my emotions. And so when people have asked me how you're doing, I just want to be like, yo, this sucks. Like, I don't know what else to say to you. So what I would encourage you all to say, and what I've been telling people, is just 2 questions. Either 1, you can ask, how can I support? Or 2, how can I help? Those 2 questions are fundamentally better than asking me, how are you doing? Because I'm doing terrible.
And so if I'm
Yeah,
reaching, so I just want to ask, so if I'm contacting you for the first time, and last week, so I know I contacted you over the weekend, and I said exactly what you said. How are you doing? Right?
Yeah.
Would you much rather have me said, hey, how can I help? Because I just know how you're doing. I just want to be really clear that people understand this, because it's super important.
Yeah. So think about it this way. If you were walking down the street and you saw someone bleeding out, you would ask them, how are you doing? Like, yo, the person's bleeding out. This person's about to die. So I would not ask that person, how are you doing? I would say, how can I help you? Do I need to call 911? Do I need to call your parents, your brother, sister? Right? So that's how I see it. So right now, we as a community are bleeding out. We've, dealt with a lot of different things, right? And we all know those, the Trayvon Martins, obviously the Floyd situation. Like, I can go on, and that's not what we're here for. But I want you all to think about that person on the side of the road that's bleeding out. And like, that's our community right now, which makes it emotional for all of us. And so when you see someone that's bleeding out, ask them, how can I help? How can I support? And that's why that question is being stated there, Richard.
Hold on. Hey, Tom, can you jump in for a second? Henry's dialing me.
Yep. Yeah. So, and I saw that Instagram video. So, so then how can other people help? Maybe to just jump straight into it. Like, how can we support the conversation?
I think there's a lot of people in here that have a platform, or there's a lot of people in here that know someone that has a platform. And I think the biggest thing is there's a lot of people who have a voice that have been afraid to put out their voice. I was fortunate that I had a lot of people push me to create content. However, it's a very scary feeling, because once you put content out, you're out there. Tom, you know this. Once you create content, you're out there. Like, you can't go back and be like, hey guys, I'm not going to create content, because you're going to get a lot of flack for it. So once you're in it, right? It's like the Matrix. So the reason I'm saying that is because there's a lot of people who are in our community as Black individuals that may not want to put themselves out there, because now they have to consistently be out there and they have to watch what they say at every moment. And that's elevated even higher when you're an African American. So it's giving people the support to be like, hey, it's okay for you to speak your voice right now and be okay with that. Because sometimes we don't want to say what we want to say because we know it could be completely flipped in a different way. And Galen can attest this more than myself. For a Black woman, it's worse, because if they're angry and they want to make a point, it's like, all right, well, it's the angry Black woman again. Like, here she goes. And like, that's a real thing. And so it's hard for people to be that across the board and then give those insights, And so that's like a difficult part about it. And that's one way to support. Another way is to call out certain things that you're seeing that are wrong. Like, you might be in a group text, right? And you're like, whoa, okay, like, why are you saying that right now? I was having a conversation with someone 2 days ago, and they were telling me, Richard, they had the same background as you. They were a Jew, right? So you know what the oppression is, right, on that side. It's different, but we understand it. And she was telling me she had someone that was saying, hey, I don't understand why everyone's like looting and rioting, et cetera. And that's a whole different conversation. But she was like, look, you don't understand the pain that those people are going through. Like, really understand like why that's happening. Don't just focus on the action of it, focus on why the action is happening. right? And so that's one way to support is being like, whoa, like call that person out to be like, that doesn't make any sense what you're saying here, right? Because I think a lot of people say things that don't really understand what they're saying and how to really relate that to individuals as well. Tom, another thing that I would say, and I wrote this out on a post, is taking the time to listen and educate yourself. So you all are here listening at what I'm saying. So you are taking that action of learning and understanding what's going on. I know if I don't understand something, I go try to figure it out. Now, this is another example. I just recently did a training with a team in Europe. Now, the first time I did a training in Europe, I was saying stuff that people were like, that doesn't work in Europe. What are you talking about? And so what I had to do is seek to understand. I reached out to people that were in France, Germany, the Benelux, Nordics, UK, that were reps to figure out, okay, what am I saying wrong? Like, is it I'm too hype? Do I need to calm down? Are my examples off? Like, what's going on? And so then they gave me examples like, Morgan, when you say this, that's how we're taking it. I was like, wow. And so that was such an enlightening moment for me. And now when I go train teams in Europe, I know the style I need to take. And so it's the same thing here, is that seeking to understand and learning, because it's from our perspective, right? And you're just taking our words to be like, okay, now I know how to approach those conversations. So Tom, great question there. But those are a couple ways you can take action immediately right after this call.
Curious, do you feel like all this attention is lip service right now? Do you feel like there does it, or is it, well, this is the standard lip service, but maybe this time there's a little hope? Like, what's that, where does that feel for you?
Yeah. So for me, I said this 2 nights ago. I was like, I feel like we're in a moment in time where this will be the month's talk. And then a month later, we're going to be on to the next thing. And then this will be completely forgotten. However, we're still going to be stuck in the same spot. That's my fear, right? However, me being an optimist, I feel like this will be a change. And this is why I'm telling you this, Richard, is because ironically enough, voting's coming right around the corner. So because voting's coming around on the corner, I'm more optimistic because there is real change that can happen. People are seeing the protests, they're getting their emotions and realize, all right, enough is enough. We can vote. It starts locally, and I'll talk to Jen about this, but it starts locally, voting in the right people that can invoke change, and also as well, voting on who's going to be our leader moving forward, right? And everyone has their opinions on that. However, from a leadership perspective, it's trash. I'm gonna be honest with you, it's trash. So because the leadership perspective is not there, it goes from the top bottom of how everyone is going to execute moving forward. And so with that, I feel like there is light at the end of the tunnel because there is voting. I think this will spur more action at the end of the day. However, I am definitely concerned that this will be something that's in a moment where everyone's like, oh yeah, cool, I'll do this, I'll post this and move on, which is why the post that I put, I was like, hey, look, we're going to see who's an action leader versus a thought leader. Anybody can come up with a video and post and talk about what their perspective is. Very few people can take action on that perspective.
I want to add something to that too, Morgan. When we
Yep.
talked about like not being the token Black person, and my feelings around this is, I've had people reach out to me now, sort of all of a sudden, being like, hey, do you want to write this blog post? Do you want to, be on this podcast? Because I put it out there and I said, here are some actionable things that people can do who have a platform. So I did expect some people to come back to me and offer that. And I'm grateful for it. I'm not saying I'm not, but I'm also turning it around and saying, if you want me to do this, then let's not just talk about what it means to be Black and the struggle of being Black, but let's also talk about business. I'm not just a Black woman and that's it. Like, that's not the only definition here. Like, I have some experience too. I've done other things. Let's just not define me by a Black woman who happens to work in sales, but all we're going to talk about are just the struggles of what's happening right now. Like, let's talk about some other things as well. Let's bring that into the conversation.
That's really great. I love that. And we have another friend who's joining. Again, it sounds awkward. another African American friend, like, look, I have them. Like, that sounds terrible to say, like, but that's what it feels like for me. And I don't like that feeling, and I don't want that feeling. But Henry Fraser's joining us. Henry is a good friend of mine. He's in the financial services world. We met in startup world years and years ago. He decided to pass off his dreadlocks and join me in the club. Henry's also a massively competitive guy. He played, college football, Division I at University of Indiana. And he also sees this too in lots of different ways. So I'm going to just sort of pause. And Henry, what are you feeling at the moment with all this stuff? And please just sort of join the conversation wherever you feel comfortable.
So I did just join the conversation. So thank you guys for having me on. So I'm not sure what you guys talked about beforehand. I ran into a little bit of technical difficulties trying to get on the call, so I apologize for that. What am I feeling about this situation? I think, it's almost like when you have a sibling or a family member die, and you get all these calls, people checking up on you, people wanting to post something and wanting to get your opinion, whether it's good or not. You end up having all these conversations about what we feel, what can we do, what's white privilege, is it real or not? And these conversations are draining, and they're tiring. So, everyone calls and they say, how are you doing? And we all just want to be like, I'm doing good, I'm doing okay, I'm doing fine, that regular response. But, really I'm not. I'm not doing okay. I'm tired and I'm not really sleeping much. I recently had a friend pass away. He was out there in Indianapolis during the protest and noticed a couple girls getting robbed and tried to step in and save them, and got shot and murdered on Sunday. So while COVID is a global pandemic that we're all struggling with, the Black community is affected by the COVID like no other community. And on top of this, we have all of this stuff. So it's a tough situation, but in the midst of it, and what I do, and what my passion is, and why I do what I do, and the power that I have to educate people on their finances and how to get out of the situation, and how to accumulate wealth, and how to take power of our own circumstances and move forward. I have to be a stand for my clients. I have to be a stand for the people that I talk to, and kind of be just constantly looking at a way out, right? So, that's kind of just like an overall answer of how I'm feeling right now. If there's any more specific questions, I can kind of dive into anything.
No, I think it's a good
specific.
baseline, and it brings in that perspective. And just the quick update is, what am I as a Caucasian male supposed to say? And Morgan said it well, which was, how are you doing? Well, we kind of know. Morgan's suggestion was just to contact someone and just say, hey man, how can I help? Just sort of knowing that Henry's feeling this way, and that Morgan and Galem and anyone, right? Again, it feels awkward. I'm talking about the African American people on this podcast, on this episode, and all that just feels really awkward. So I apologize if it comes off awkward or wrong. But that was a really important takeaway for me, is to just say, well, what can I do? Right? I know this sucks for you. What can I do? And when Morgan said it, I'm like, that's so simple. Like, that's such an easy thing to understand, but we're stuck in our process. I know, Morgan, you want to jump in, and then I want to talk a little bit more about, well, what does change mean besides voting in the right people? I can vote in, quote unquote, the right people, but what do I tell them to do? Right? Because that's the other part of the problem. And I don't think we know. I've been learning and educating myself. So I've got some ideas, but anyway, so Morgan, go ahead, jump in, but then, that's sort of where I'd like to take this conversation.
Yeah. And first of all, Henry, I'm sorry for your loss. It's definitely not the news that we want to hear. So I'm definitely sorry about that. And then you can add any context on what I'm going to say here. And it's, what I tell people is that you're not going to change someone's opinion of being racist if they're 40 or 50 plus years old. There's no posts, there's no video, there's no movie that I can send them to change their opinion. And the reason for that is because if you go back to childhood, a lot of our actions, our mindset, our whole foundation is based off our childhood and what we were taught and what we learned throughout that period. And so what I would encourage others to do is, yes, post what you're going to post, be supportive, ask those questions to your African American friends. However, where I'm shifting a lot of my focus right now is to the youth, because if I can impact those individuals that are younger and I can change their mindset and have them have an understanding of what's going on, it will better our community in the future, because the youth is the future. And so, and really changing that perspective, like those are my thoughts right now.
Yeah, but that takes forever, Morgan, right? Like that's going to take forever.
For sure. I'm just saying right now, voting is a part of it, right? Taking action and talking to certain people, telling people, hey, these are things. But I'm saying action right now is the youth as a whole, because that in line is going to be the future, because it's not going to change in a month, right? It's not going to change in 2 months. Might not even change in a year. So in order to take action now,
like there's a tremendous opportunity to change in 6 months. Like to your point earlier, is like
true. Yeah.
Thank goodness this is not 2017, right? Where we got to wait 4 more years for.
Yeah, that then I'd be like, okay, I don't know. But I think in change now, I think my answer is the youth as of right now, because I don't have the exact answer of what the action steps need to be, because I think they would all be in motion. But I obviously would hear from Henry and his perspective, but that's what's been going through my mind. This answer could change next week, but these are my thoughts in my head as of right now.
Yeah, and I don't think there is an exact answer. I think that I get that question a lot as well. And we have a lot of cheerleaders. We have a lot of people that are voicing their opinion, but we need sponsors. We need people that can actually be a gatekeeper and give other Black people opportunities, and make this voice a little bit louder. So I do get a lot of people that say, Henry, what can we do? And one of my responses is, well, what are your thoughts? What are you thinking so far? What is your biggest impact? I may talk to someone that's a personal trainer. They have their own personal training business. They might be able to do something different than a VP or a sales exec that leads a sales team. So you can start by having the conversation with your own family, with your own circle. Are people in your own family thinking like you? Are people in your own family up on what's actually going on? And then if you run a sales team, are you talking to your sales team about this? Do you have a sales team that looks like America? Are you hiring Black people? Are you hiring Black salespeople? Are you giving them the opportunity to step into these roles? Because a lot of times in these neighborhoods, a lot of it is exposure. And the reason why there's no answer is because regardless of the current situation, regardless of the struggle, whether it's the healthcare system, whether it's the education system, whether it's the criminal justice system, whether it's COVID, whether it's whatever it is, it always hits the Black community worse. So you can kind of pick an area that you want to focus on. If you're in the finance industry and you feel like you can educate people on tools to build wealth and leave legacies and bridge this racial wealth gap, then that's what you can do. If you're in a position where you have other leaders, you're hosting podcasts, you're doing these things, you're giving me an opportunity to come on here and speak. That's doing something. That's allowing me to share my perspective with other people. So I think people can kind of start in their own wheelhouse, kind of take a look at what the Black community is struggling with and figure out what speaks to me the most. Maybe it is education. Maybe I do go and I take my kids to their little league and I notice there's no Black people in our entire league. Why is this? Can we get our league to open up another after school program or maybe venture out into other areas, right? So just coming up with different ideas, just like you guys are, just trying to figure it out.
How about, you brought up the point there, Henry, a little bit around, businesses too. Can we talk a little bit about, there's folks on the line here. I don't know everyone that's on this call, but there's people that are in all stages of their career. Some might own a business or be a vice president or someone with authority at a company. And some might be earlier in their career, like, someone like myself. But for people that are running businesses, or for people even that are maybe on the lower stage of a business that want to see more diversity and want to see change happen in their organization. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions on that? Because I think that, to your point, is it starts at the top. In my opinion, it starts at the CEO. It starts if you have, a chief diversity officer, a chief people officer, something like that. A lot of companies don't have that. So I'm curious, maybe from the top down, how, what you would suggest from the CEO or from just, the everyday salesperson like myself.
Yeah, so I wrote a letter to my company, so I represent New York Life Insurance Company, and, we've been around for 175 years, we're a $500 billion company. And I wrote a letter to our VP, and I said, there's about 1,200 African-American agents. There's about 6% of financial advisors are Black across America. And as much as we're screaming at the top of our lungs trying to affect change, it doesn't seem like it's doing much. What is it going to take for this Fortune 100 company to make a public statement? When you see YouTube changing their logo to black and white as a show of solidarity, and you see Netflix and other companies coming out and publicly supporting the Black Lives movement. My company sells life insurance. Why is it that we can come up with a Brave of Heart fund for people that are dying of COVID, but we can't come up with they killing us because we're Black fund, for all these people that are dying just crazy, right? So it depends on what your company does. It depends on the industry that your company is in. And once you bring up that conversation, once you bring up that topic, it promotes more conversations within the company. And you'll see that you may have employees, you may have people that work for your company that have some pretty good ideas. They live in your communities, they're touching your products, they're selling it all the time. They understand who your clients are, they understand who your competition is, and they're gonna have some pretty good ideas of, this is what I think that we can do as a company to back us up, because you guys have a bigger audience than us as individuals do. And money talks.
I want to jump in here and talk about this because I just had conversations about this, like the branding of these large companies out there. So, Slack posted a message online saying that we stand behind, Black Lives Matter and blah, blah, blah. And that's beautiful, that's great to hear that. But the question always is, what are you doing? And how true is that? Because at the same time, they're a huge corporation putting this message out there, and that's beautiful to hear, to have that support. Just like many people who are on this call right now have put in the same type of messages. But then the real question is, what are they actually doing? And I live for looking at people's comments. That's usually when you see a lot of interesting things happening. And I read the comments, and people were posting like, yeah, well, what about your leadership team? Link, and I looked at Slack's leadership team, and it was disappointing. So at the same time as they're posting these things saying we stand behind Black lives, blah blah blah, like, what have you actually done, and what are you doing to improve that? Because if you don't have people of my, then you're just talking, it's just lip service.
And I think a lot of these companies haven't really done anything in the past. But I do think that there are companies out there that are in the process of doing things and figuring out what they can do. So it's a weird situation that we're in, because we're asking the questions, what can you do? We're trying to push people to do more, but we also have to acknowledge that there was a time where there was no company ever would make any type of public announcement that says, I'm with Black Lives Matter. That would have never happened, and we do have to understand the progress that we're making. And I feel as though if we have a company that has stepped out and made that statement, now is the time to advance on that. They're already thinking about this, as opposed to taking the stance of, that's okay, but this is more like, great, this is something that did help in these ways, because now you got your whole audience that's thinking about it. Let's look at what's the next step, as opposed to trying to figure out, like, I don't know, it's tough.
I'll add to this because when I was a manager, we did this. Like, we got people to come in we had an all diverse team. We had Asians, Hispanics, Black, white, all different demographics, and this is the process that we took. Now, obviously, large organizations, it might be a different process. I was in a SMB mid-market company, but we found that the reason most people don't apply is because they don't know. Most African Americans don't even know that you can go get a SaaS job and earn near 6 figures as an SDR. A lot more people would apply if they knew that. I didn't know that coming out of college. The only reason I found out is because I went to a local event and they told me that I could make X amount of money. And I was like, what the heck? Why didn't they tell me this in college, right? Like,
I think that's across the board too. And by all means, I think back to what Henry was saying, it affects the African American community, first in a lot of ways and most and deeply. But I think that's a challenge with sales in general in college. Right.
Well, I disagree with you here, Richard, because how many people do you see that are Black leaders or Black voices in the sales community that would make you feel comfortable to apply in the first place if you were a different race? That's what I'm saying. Like, hey, I can see it and be like, okay, well, I see all the top 50 people are all white. I probably don't have a chance in that.
Got it. Look, there's an internal bias, right? There's one that just sort of shows up. I'm not aware of it in that way.
Which is completely fine. So the reason that I applied is because I went to a private school and I hung out with all different type of races. So that wasn't in my head. However, when I asked my friends about it, I was like, yo, why don't you apply for this job? It's like, yo, you're the only Black person. So I don't want to ruin your vibe of being the token guy. So you can just, go do your thing. And I was like, I get that. So the thing is, if there's no other commonality, why would I apply for that role? And so what we ended up doing is I wrote the job descriptions so that we could get more African Americans because it was more in my tone.
What are those things? So I think that's a great, that's an action item. What are the kinds of things that hopefully don't come off patronizing? Yeah. And I've seen this about gender. I've seen this about the different words you use to attract women versus men. What about African Americans?
So, the main thing that we ended up doing was it was me and then my other friend. I'm not the best writer, so I was like, hey, what should we do here? It was the initiative that I put out there. What we have found is words. I mean, this is for women too, but we found words that were like killer or, even degrees. Like there's certain things that we just took out. We found that a lot of people that were our top reps didn't even have college degrees. Like they had gone straight from high school. They dropped out of college. They went to go work at a sales job somewhere else, and they couldn't get in SaaS because they had no SaaS experience and no degree. So we took out, it was just certain requirements. Like we took out degrees, we took out SaaS experience, we took out words that were, it was stuff we took out, Richard. It was not that we really added. It was just words that were over embellished sometimes in job descriptions. That's like, if you don't have X degree, they would turn you away because you're like, oh, well, these words I don't understand. So if I don't understand these words in the job description, how am I going to be able to do this role?
So let me ask you this. Would it, in your mind, as we talk about this and walk through it, should we go as far as to say, and again, it depends on the role, but
for sure,
no sales experience required, right? So that someone who hopefully, from an African-American perspective can sort of say that. Do we need to go so far as is it lip service or rude to say, looking to increase our diversity program, please apply? Like, is that, can we start to do those things, or will it be tone deaf, or will it be insulting?
Yeah, I think the key thing, as someone mentioned earlier, is a chief diversity officer. So I believe that Zoom had, I don't know when they hired that person, but it was pretty recently. And so I think every organization should highly consider, if they are about it, right, is to get someone that is a chief diversity officer, a VP of diversity. So Richard, they can lead that initiative, because then it's not tone deaf. It's like, hey, we hired a chief diversity officer, a VP of diversity, and we're now holding this initiative to get more people that are diverse.
That needs to be in the job description though, right? Because that's, from the candidate perspective, the first thing they see.
I think that's big. I mean, from my perspective, my fellow brothers and sisters can speak on this, but my thing is that, like, if I saw that you hired a chief diversity officer and in the requirements or the responsibilities you put, hey, we hired a chief diversity officer, we're looking to bring more people diverse, I feel like there's a major backing there. It's not just saying, hey, we're trying to get more diverse people, because it's like, no, we hired a chief diversity officer because we're very serious about this whole thing that we're trying to do. That's from my perspective there, Richard.
Can I chime in here? This is Stacy. I'm sorry. I'm not like one of the hosts or anything like that. Richard, I love your content.
Chime in.
Thank you so much for like having this conversation. I think it's been long overdue. And I really sincerely appreciate you taking the charge and leading the discussion. I think one thing I wanted to add to this is a former employer that I worked for, they had a diversity and inclusion officer, but the issue is that you can't just have the person in office. You have to make sure the organization has the resources to support that individual. What I ended up finding is that she seemed to take on the whole burden herself. And so there weren't other people helping to, I guess, with the overall initiative generally for the organization. So I think while it's important to have a person leading up DE&I, what is the organization gonna do to help support that individual, I guess, is what I want to add.
I think that's great. By the way, just one thing that I've been thinking about, and I haven't even asked Tom, because this is really Tom's thing as much as it is mine, although he always lets me do all the talking. We're going to do this again in a month, and hopefully a month after that, right? Like I want to make this sort of a monthly theme of this, and we can move into more diversity, inclusion conversations and things like that. But I think to everything that we're talking about, of course, everybody's doing it this week. I care, but I really care about it in a month, right? And I care about it in 2 months. And so just so everybody knows, we'll get an invite out to people if you want to do it. It's not required, but just wanted people to know I see this as much more than, hey, let's have this one-time situational convenient conversation, right?
I would say, Richard, like, I don't think that you have to lower the standards in regards to what you're looking for in the candidates. Like if you want someone that has sales experience, I don't think that you should have to lower that standard, but you should look at where are you guys getting your sales employees? Like, how are you getting them? Where are you recruiting? In the Bay Area, there's a whole Black Tech conference, of a lot of engineers, a lot of tech people that are Black, successful, smart, that are out there. There's a whole bunch of different Black organizations that as a company, you can reach out to the head of that organization and you can say, hey, my company is not representative of the Bay Area. There's not a lot of diversity. I know that's not going to happen quickly. It's not a quick change, but we're open to doing more outreach. We're open to getting out there and letting our face be seen, our company logo being seen in these neighborhoods that have Black people, in these organizations, supporting these local organizations. That's going to bring more eyeballs to your company. That's going to get more Black people looking at your organization as a place where I can go and where I can work. And you're actually farming in the areas that when you look at your resumes that's coming in, you have a more balance of the nationality of the type of people that's applying for your job.
What are some of those places, Henry? Like, does the NAACP have a local jobs community website for their chapters? Are there places where we can reach out? That, because again, I just don't know. Like, and I'm willing to admit that.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's 100 Black men. There's an East Bay Black professional organization. I don't know of all the organization either, but Google's our friend. Just Google Black organizations. You can go to their websites. All of us are in sales. We all know how to get through gatekeepers and get to the owner. But if you have an intention of changing something, you could look at who are you trying to target. Where's our outreach going to? A lot of the problem with the Black community is we're not exposed. I was lucky enough to have a mentor younger with a Boys and Girls Club. I grew up in Vallejo, California, and he took me out in high school and took me on a Black college tour and got me out of my city and opened my eyes up to what's possible, right? You mentioned SAS and stuff like that, and you're talking about, Morgan was talking about kids. A lot of these kids have no ideas what that is because their schools aren't teaching it. Our schools aren't like other schools, so taking that into accountability as well.
I want to add to Henry's point. So Richard, another thing that we did is we would go to those organizations, as Henry was talking about, which is spot on. And then we would invite some people to come to the office and be like, hey, this is what a day in the life looks like if you were to be an SDR AE from my perspective, right? Everyone's different. But we brought them to the office, showed them how it all worked, brought them into the meetings. We had them shadow people, and then we had like a 30-minute Q&A. So it showed them like what was happening if they, again, wanted to be a part of it. Because again, just as Henry said, it's really access. Like most of my friends don't even know that like you can be at home and sell and not have to go in an office at this point, right? Like most of my friends don't even know that. And they're like, how are you doing that? It's like, well, yeah, I got into it X amount of years ago. And really a lot of it's access to information, but showing people what it's like also is another way to get that more diverse opinion.
And how about, if you're hiring entry level, going to different schools, right? I mean, that's how I found my job that I've been at for the last 5 years, was through like a school fair, right? And if you're the person that's doing the hiring or, helping to recruit, going to, different cities or different states or different schools that are going to have a more diverse selection of people, right? And that's across the board. Like if you're just going to the same spots all the time, then you're going to get the same results and the same type of people.
Yep, absolutely.
I totally agree. I want to shift a little bit to this topic that I've been learning about, about qualified immunity. And again, I know I asked, I think Molly was the only one who says they understand it. I'm curious if it's part of the education in an African-American or Black family community to understand that this is what the cops know and believe. And so Morgan, Galen, you're in Europe, so I'm sure the laws are different, but I think Stacy and Henry, do you even know what that is in the terms of how all this stuff is happening and going down?
I mean, honest, I don't know what that means.
So this is what I read, and I'll send it out in an email. It's a great story. Is that qualified immunity, and I'll describe it as best I can. I won't get it 100% right. Is what allows law enforcement to get away with what they've been able to get away with. And it has nothing to do with this perceived threat issue. It's a federal doctrine that was created by the judiciary, not by the Senate or and the House and signed by a president, but a judiciary, that if there's no legal precedence for this situation, then we can't apply it in this situation. So for example, there's tons of cases around this that a woman, African-American woman, 7 months pregnant, got pulled over for speeding. She had her daughter in the car, if I remember the story correctly. The cops told her to get out of the car. She said she didn't think she needed to get out of the car for a speeding ticket or something like that. And then the cops were like, well, where should we tase her to make her get out of the car? And they said, well, we can't tase her in the stomach. There's a baby. We're going to tase her in the arm, or like they're having a conversation, first of all, which is shocking. Well, when she then went to court, because there's been no court case decided that says tasing in this situation of a pregnant woman at this stage hasn't been a legal issue that's been decided, we cannot make this legal decision. This is, as I understand, and there's a ton of these cases, as I understand it, this is the reason whenever you hear people say, well, we need to take each case on its own merits and we need to look at the facts of each case and all this stuff. So at the federal level, this is part of the problem, is that they've created case law when in fact there is no actual law. It's some doctrine. And so for me, this is part of what I was coming to you with, Morgan, was like, well, what do we tell our people who are elected, right? And this is the kind of stuff that's, when we talk about phrases like systemic racism, right? This is what the system has been built this way, right? The system is being, the system was created by white men, period. That's it. Like there was no other people involved in the system. And if you're reading White Frugality, which I am, and I know it's the popular book, you're learning that Well, it's the white men who are granting permission constantly. It was the white men who granted permission to end slavery. It was the white men who granted women's suffrage, but only to white women. African-American women didn't get the right to vote till much later. And so this is what it's meant by systemic. And it doesn't mean that there aren't stronger and better intentions within the people trying to change the system. But that's what I'm running into. That's where my head is going, okay, this conversation is great. I'm happy to have it. I want to have it again in a month because I think that's important. But we also need to tell people what needs to change at the legal level, because I think everybody's, in charge is getting away with it because we don't know what to ask for. We're not being specific enough, right? If I walk into my office and I say to my boss, I've done this and this, I want a raise and I want a title. Well, now my boss knows exactly what I want. We aren't telling our bosses what we want specifically enough. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox for a second, but I just want people to walk away with this phrase of like qualified immunity. Please go read it. Please educate yourself. Please educate me if I got it wrong. But that's a big piece of it for me that's infuriating at the moment.
Yeah, so Richard, like I said, I haven't heard of that before myself, but that's definitely something I'll go do more further research on. One thing I'll point out, I don't, Galen might have some insights here. So I always find this super interesting, is here in America, you're treated a certain way if you're Black. However, when you leave, it's completely different. Like I'm telling you, it's completely different. When I go to Canada, when I go to Europe, when I travel, when I did travel, right now, Richard, when I did travel and do trainings, I was perceived completely differently than I am here. And yes, to a certain point, there are people who can explain it way better than I can. I've been watching a lot of stuff lately, and they bring up a lot of great points of how the system is set up basically for failure for an African American. However, the reason I'm bringing that up is it's not just white people, because I don't think it's white people's fault, everybody. I think that's aggressive and that doesn't make sense. It's based on how the system was organized in the past, based on how people developed it that way. And
yeah,
so,
but it was done by white people.
Places. Yeah,
but
right.
It was done by white people, Morgan. Like, right?
Yeah, yeah. I'm saying, Richard, what I'm saying is that it's not your fault. You see what I'm saying? Like, you didn't come up with the system.
Thank you.
Like that's.
But
I think that's.
I do agree that old white men created this issue, and old white men need to fix this issue.
Exactly.
As much as they're asking us what to do, we need to be asking them, what are you going to do? Like, these old white men broke this system. And it's funny, I talk to my Black friends that are from Canada and from Africa and from other places. A lot of them don't even know about the civil rights movement. Since they were kids, they were taught that, they were kings and they were built up from being young. When you're a Black kid in America, you're not taught those history lessons. You're not shown pictures of yourself in powerful positions. You're raised to think that for some reason, white America is at war with us. We're not at war with them. There's no historical pictures of a group of Black people standing around a tree hanging a white dude. Like, we're not at war with them. Why are they at war with us? You know what I'm saying? So it's very frustrating, and I'm constantly amazed of how much of my own history I don't know. I didn't really know about the civil rights movement like I thought I did until I actually went to Birmingham and walked through the Civil Rights Museum. There's so much about our own history. I watched the 13th Amendment on Netflix and realized that there was a law in the Constitution that said, yeah, we have to abolish slavery, but it's lawful to keep a slave if there's a criminal, and then you have the chain gang and the Jim Crow laws and all these things that are written to allow these things to continue to happen and nothing be done about it. So it's the voting process. It's understanding the voting process when you're teaching your kids about the voting process, when you're taking them to the ballots, when you're doing these things, and your kids have a Black friend, and invite them along. Talk to them about that too, because maybe their parents aren't talking to them about that. I tell people, when it comes to my wheelhouse, which is finances, the first Black advisor was hired 63 years ago in all of America. and white America has been learning about wealth accumulation and assets for centuries, right? So we're just behind when it comes to education in some areas.
I know, Morgan, you'd sort of asked Galen for opinion before I sort of shift topics. I wanted to see if Galen wanted to jump in on something. And again, anybody else is welcome to jump in too.
Yeah, so Richard and I, we spoke about this a little bit yesterday. So, I'm not African American. I was not born or raised in the US. I just happened to spend 9 years there. I was born and raised in Sweden, and then I moved to the US, spent 9 years, and then now I'm back in Europe, in London. And my experience has been a very interesting one. I'm not going to go into the details right now today, but I didn't really realize what position I was in being a Black woman until I moved to the US. It was first then that people started to point at me and saying, like, basically, do you understand? Like, you are a Black woman in this country, and these are the issues that you're going to have. Because I didn't grow up with that. In Sweden, people are extremely subtle with the racism. They like, I haven't had the experience, but I know other family members, and my sister who's on this call as well, she's had very unfortunate situations where people will call her awful things. Both of my sisters and other family members, I haven't had that, but they might have said something behind my back. But it's the subtle ways that they go about racism in Europe. I think in general, both here in the UK and in Sweden, they won't tell me straight up what their thoughts are, or how they're feeling, or what they're thinking, but you can tell sometimes with certain actions or lack of actions that I'm being judged, and it's based on the way I look. So that's been very different, because in the US, I feel like people are a bit more straightforward with it. If they don't like you because of your skin color, like, they'll make sure that. But in Europe, it's like they're just gonna look the other way. And for me, that's the hardest thing to deal with, because I don't know what to do with that. I'm a very naturally straightforward person, so I expect people to be straightforward. But when they're the opposite, I'm like, I don't even know what to do with it. And for a very long time, I didn't even acknowledge that was happening, and I had to have other people point it out to me, which was even worse. So that's been my experience with all of this for a long time.
Thanks for sharing that. I want to move on to one more topic that's really dear and really effective to this. And by the way, I just asked everyone in the chat, please go post the one or two things you're walking away from this conversation with, something that you feel is actionable. One, to sort of hold ourselves accountable, but two, so that we can all sort of get a sense of, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Because I feel like there's a lot of conversations that have happened today, and I want to make sure that we can, really articulate it more than, hey, I went to this conversation today, right? Like it needs to be way more than that. If you know me, and if you don't know me, mental health is a huge issue for me. I struggle with it. I talk about it constantly. I'm what's known as a functioning depressed person. I see a therapist. I take medications. I meditate. I do all kinds of things. I'm lucky in my depression, which is weird to say, because I've never wanted to hurt myself, or I've never wanted to hurt anybody else. So to some extent, I consider it mild. And that's weird to say. But I also know that this, imagine what I have as a Caucasian man in America, and then imagine what Morgan and Henry and Galem and people who don't, what this does to their mental health, that you have to worry about this. Like, we talk about it in the sense of, we know that in African-American families, and I don't know what this is like in Europe, Galen, but they have to have the talk about what to do if you're pulled over, right? Just the fact that you even have to think about that, much less have to do it, affects your mental health. And it's really, really important that everybody understand that. And I just really want to make sure people understand it and know that that's an important part of this discussion, because mental health does not discriminate. It doesn't care about your age. It doesn't care about your race. It doesn't care about your gender identity. It doesn't care about anything. It is just, and we all have it. And the last thing I'll say about mental health is that mental health is different than mental illness. If I say, how's your physical health? Henry will say something. Tom can say something, right? Morgan, obviously, I know you tore your Achilles, last year during the playoffs, right? Um, so, so mental health is like your physical health. What do you do to take care of yourself mentally, right? Not mental illness. So anyway, so I just really want to make sure that people walk away with that. I'm part of this group called Uncrushed. It's particular to sales. I've shared my story there. Lots of people have shared their stories about their challenges with mental health or mental illness, how it affects them in a sales world. If anybody here wants to go there to uncrush.org and you want to share your story and talk about it in a public way, feel free. There's tons of resources there. But I want to make sure that this isn't just a situational sort of legal issue. It is, all of those things matter, but it also has this much deeper connection, right? There's a mental aspect to this that goes back to even what Morgan was saying. We were taught this at a very young age, right? Whatever it is and some of it was intentionally taught and some of it was just societally taught, and that affects your mental capacity around this. So it's really, really important.
I want to agree with you on that, Richard, especially anxiety. For me and a lot of my friends, the anxiety is something that you've kind of gotten used to just dealing with, and when you look at COVID and just the pandemic, it creates a lot of anxiety for a lot of people, and for Black people specifically. I read a stat that, we make up about 13% of the American population, but almost 60% of the people dying from COVID are Black, right? So as a Black person, you worry about your health, you worry about your children going out and wondering if they're going to come back. You worry about yourself going out, wondering if yourself is going to come back, and now that we're having COVID, we have to go out in public with masks on. I'm 6'2", Black guy, having to wear a mask out in public. It creates a little bit of anxiety. So oftentimes our work community can be that sanctuary. It can be that stress reliever. When you're having these type of conversations, asking what to do, just this helps. This type of conversation helps. Knowing that I have a safe place where I can come and I can talk and I can express my feelings and I can be heard. Oftentimes when the shelter in place is lifted and you go to your organization, I love seeing tech companies. Sometimes there's the ping pong table over there, something fun. Like a lot of that reduces the stress. It's a stress reliever for us sometimes, just to get into a safe place. So just recognizing that and understanding that your employees are stressed for a lot of reasons that you might not understand. There's a lot of anxiety there.
Thank you, Henry. I really appreciate it. Anyway, by the way, so I do want to wrap up because I know people have other things they need to get done today. First of all, thank you to everybody for just joining and listening. Thank you to obviously Gail and Stacy and Morgan for jumping in and just sharing your perspectives in sort of what I feel is probably a fairly disorganized way, but it felt like it went off pretty well. I appreciate it. And to what I said earlier, I do want to arrange this again in a month because I want to see what we're feeling in a month. I also want to see what we think is changing. What have we done? So that's sort of everybody's homework, is to go do something, talk to somebody, share something, contact a congressman if you haven't, research qualified immunity, whatever those things are. So with that, I'll let everybody go and just say thank you so much and really appreciate the time for everyone.
Thanks for inviting me, Richard. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for inviting me, Richard.
Bye, everybody.
Nice to meet you guys. Stay safe.